All right. So what are we talking about today? We're going to do a quick introduction to me. I'll let you know who I am and why you should care about what I have to say. We'll talk about Ikigai, the concept of Ikigai, what it means for real and what it's pitched as nowadays. And this is going to apply across the board, not just to men. I do primarily coach men these days, but I also coach women as well. It's not like I only coach men. We'll talk about what healthy emotional expression actually is, and then we're going to kind of bring it all together because it's a quick day today. I want to just give you guys to dip our toes into these concepts that could be really easily taken years to explore. So, who am I? I'm this, Dr. Coach Lee said, I'm a founder and CEO of Nayan Leadership and Hachi Media. Those are my companies. Nayan Leadership is a professional development and personal development company, and Hachi Media is a social media marketing company. I do primarily mindset work, whether it's whatever context it is, business, leadership, life, it's really all mindset. Outside of that, I'm an artist, photographer, author. Generally, I like to say that I'm a creator. I like to create different things in different forms. For me, coaching is a creative art because I'm working with my clients to create the business that they want and to create the lives that they want to live. That'll be important a little later. I'm also a recovering attorney. So I did have that background in law. I'm also a huge nerd and a dog dad and an explorer of the world. These are all different aspects of myself that I try to live into and try to express of myself. And again, we'll talk about why I do that in a second. So let's jump into this big question. What the heck is Ikigai? So anyone here, put your hands up if you've heard of Ikigai, if anyone's heard of it, the concepts of it. All right. So what you've heard of probably is this thing right here, this little concentric circle business where and I call it American Ikigai for a reason. I'll tell you that in a second. So what they tell you is what you're good at, what the world needs, what you love, and what you can get paid for. The intersection is Ikigai. That's an oversimplification. All right. So this is actually the oversimplified to the point where it's really focused on profit at the end of the day. It's like, what can you do to make money? What can you do to live your life and pay your bills? That is so much smaller than what Ikigai actually is. Um, it's been adapted for American audiences because a lot of these quote unquote coaches, and they use the word very loosely, it's convenient to be able to say, I can teach you Ikigai, I can teach you how to make as much money as possible. And then they make a shit ton of money, and then there's this emptiness, and they're like, what's next? Why do I still feel empty after I've made a couple $1 million, I've sold $100 million company, or I've made enough just to pay for my family, and I'm still feeling empty. I don't feel like I'm enjoying my life. So this is actual Ikigai. All right. It's so much more than just one set of concentric circles. There's actually infinite circles here, but at the middle of that is you. All right. Ikigai is about living your potential, your full potential across the board and expressing every part of yourself. So there's going to be a part of yourself that, yes, does need to make money because you got to live. Unfortunately, fortunately, depending on how you look at it, you got to live. You got to make money to live. You have to survive and pay your bills. Fine. But that's only one aspect, right? Who here loves only one thing in the whole world? Only one thing, nothing else. Right. There's no such thing as a person who only loves one thing. Those are single one-dimensional characters and they're only in books and movies. Okay. In reality, we all have multiple things that we care about, multiple things that we're passionate about, multiple activities that we care about. Right. And so what we're talking about is basically honoring every aspect of yourself and getting to know every aspect of yourself. And that's the secondary part of that is you have to be able to know yourself in order to honor yourself. And if you don't know yourself, you can't possibly honor yourself. So that's what we're talking about. That's what Ikigai is really about. It's about saying, you know what? I love dogs and I also love to travel. And that those two things can be in conflict sometimes because I got to find someone to watch my dog while I travel. Or I can drive across the country and take my dog with me. And I'll figure that out and what that balance looks like. But these things can be in tension. And that's why it's difficult to talk about it all the time. That's why it's difficult to always express it and say, okay, well, how can I be passionate about two things that seem to oppose each other? Well, you can because we're human. That's what happens, right? It's a human condition. But calling it just where the intersection of profit, passion, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for, that's oversimplifying it. And that's why I say this. That's like one of these quadrants. So this is what actually Ikigai looks like. And I go through workshops with my clients when I work through this, and I help them kind of identify the different aspects of who they are, including aspects that they may not be fully comfortable with, because there is a shadow side of ourselves, which we won't talk about much today. We'll touch on it, but there's a shadow part of ourselves that we're either ashamed of, don't want anyone to know about, and you don't have to express that to anybody else, but you have to express it to yourself. You have to at least admit that that part exists of yourself and that you're not always proud of it, but it's part of you because it is ultimately trying to help you. Not always, it doesn't always succeed, but it tries. So how do we deal with emotions typically? Let's switch gears a second, right? And this is on a longitudinal space of time, right? We're taught to suppress emotions, right? We're taught to hold everything back. It's like, oh, big girls don't cry, big boys don't cry, men don't cry. What all this bullshit narrative that you hear from your parents, who mean well, by the way. They're not trying to do this because they're trying to screw you over. They're doing what they've been taught. right? They're expressing generational trauma that's been passed down for literally thousands of years, right? Because people didn't think that crying was a productive emotion, or that emotions were productive, frankly, right? A lot of women are looked down upon in professional settings because they're too emotional, because they're angry or whatever. And it's just frankly a bullshit narrative. Again, it's a discomfort. It's a discomfort with emotions because emotions are not logical, right? Those two things are not, they don't necessarily coexist all the time. I mean, they coexist, but they don't actually like measure up to each other all the time, right? So if you're emotional, you can't fully be logical, which is true, but also the flip is true. If you're being illogical, you can't always be emotional. But here's the crazy thing, right? They did a study on decision making. Even no matter how much logic you have, no matter how much evidence you have to make a decision, if you don't use emotions, if they shut off that part of the brain that deals with emotions, people cannot make decisions. Why? Why is that? Because, oh, first, let me ask you, did anyone here know why that is? So we, as human beings, we decide emotionally and we justify rationally. No matter what it is, no matter how much information we have, there's a part of us that is emotionally attached to an outcome, and we're going to go after that outcome. And we're going to justify that, backward rationalize. Everyone here has friends, I'm sure, or has done it ourselves, if we don't admit it, but we have a friend who's done this, who said, you know what? I know there's all this evidence over here to do this action, but I'm going to go ahead and try this one over here that I know probably won't work because I just feel like I'm just going to do it because I need to prove to myself that I can't do it. That's an emotional reaction. And then we're going to find whatever reasons to backwards rationalize why that's the way we want to go, why that's the best course of action. Because you know what? I think this is going to work out because of these stupid little straws that I'm pulling on here that don't actually make any sense, even though all this wealth of evidence over here says to go this way. That's called emotional decision making. That's what decision making actually is. No matter how much evidence you have, you're going to decide emotionally and you're going to rationalize after the fact. So that's the danger of not engaging emotions in these conversations. So what happens? You have suppression first. Suppression builds into frustration. Frustration over time builds into pressure. Pressure builds into anger, and then anger ends up being an explosion of some sort, right? We've all done that, right? And by anger we also mean resentment sometimes too, because anger resentment is a form of anger. Resentment is an anger that it's actually more sinister than anger because it's something you never actually fully express until it's like, okay, well, it's always under the thing. It's like, oh, man, he did it. He did it again. Left the dishes in the sink. I talked to him about it, and I'm just not. I'm just gonna wash them. I'm gonna be mad at him about it later. And then 6 months later, you're gonna hold on to that one time that person didn't do this, but you're gonna ignore the rest of it because over time, that doesn't matter. The emotionally charged moment that you've built for yourself, which actually becomes an anchor. You've set that anchor for yourself that he or she never washes the dishes or never does X action. So you're only gonna notice now when they don't do it, and when they do it, it's like, well, it's about time he did it. All right, cool, good. Now I'm going to forget about this and then remember back but remember last time he didn't do it, the last 3 times he didn't do it, or the last 4 times she didn't do this. I'm going to remember that, but I'm going to forget the times that they did do it. And then when you talk to them about it later, when you blow up with them, they'll be like, but I did it that one time. And you're like, yeah, well, that was only one time. All the other times he didn't do it. And it gets crazy, right? That's the emotional challenge of, sorry, jumping ahead. Geez, that's way ahead. That was not what I'm supposed to do. Spoiler alert. There we go. Okay, cool. Back to what I was saying. Yeah, so that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid this kind of long-term situation. So how do we deal with emotions in the moment, right? Shit happens. That leads immediately to a reaction. All right. We don't think about it. We don't process. We just react. And then we backwards rationalize and say, oh, I was triggered in the moment. It's a trigger. It's something that I can't control. That's a bullshit excuse. It's not true. It is true if you never work on yourself, but you can take control back from your triggers. They are your triggers. They're not anyone else's triggers, and there's no one else's responsibility to deal with them other than you. And putting that on someone else is frankly irresponsible and unfair. So how do we avoid this? Well, let's go back to actually how this comes up. A lot of times this will happen. The suppression thing is as part of because you're suppressing part of your Ikigai. You're suppressing part of who you are, right? It doesn't have to be an action or a thing that you're like an actual, thing you're doing. Ikigai is also part of your personality, is who you are. So by suppressing that part of yourself, let's take the dishes example, for example, by suppressing the part of yourself that needs things to be orderly and clean, well, now you're building up a pressure in that space of your life. And unless you express that pressure somewhere else in the other parts of your Ikigai and you're intentional about that, that will build up and block that energy in that space. And that's where it creates that energy buildup that's going to explode at some point in time. So you may blow up with someone for something totally that they had no idea, no business being blown up about because another part of you is being denied. Another part of you is being frustrated. Anyone here deal with that ever? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It happens to all of us. It's a human condition, right? So how do we want to deal with emotions? This is what I came up with. And by the way, this is not actually planned for it to spell out peace, but that just actually happened. I promise you that literally just happened as I was putting it together. I will say the express part was like I put that in separately, but the rest I was like, oh wait, this is spells peace. Cool. I can just let me add in something that has an e in there, and so that was where I got express from. It was actually originally it was going to be respond, but peace works better. So pause when something happens. You want to say pause, examine the situation. All right, assess the situation. What are your options? Make a choice, and then express your feelings effectively. That's what you want to be able to do in the moment. And this sounds like a lot, right? It sounds like it's like, how, wait a second. I'm in a heated argument. How am I going to say, wait, I need to take a step back. I need to pause. I'm going to take 10 minutes to do this and work this out, and then I'll respond. That's not realistic, Dhru. I know that's not realistic. I'm not saying do this and take 10 minutes to do that. This is a muscle. All right. It's a muscle you have to build over time. And so by doing this on a regular basis with smaller things you can take time back, how many people get emails that they get pissed off about or frustrated by, right? Those are opportunities. That's building that muscle. Yeah, everybody who's been put their hand up is fucking lying. Okay, let's be honest. Okay, everybody has gotten at least one email where I'm like, this bitch, are you fucking kidding me? How dare you? Actually, how dare you? I'm going to type out a response and I'm not going to send it, but I'm going to type it out and I'm going to delete it. Or I'm typing out another window just to be safe and not put an address in the to box just in case I hit send by accident. I don't want to do that, right? So we all do this, right? We all have these moments where we get triggered or whatever. And I'm not saying having triggers is bad. That's not what I'm saying, because all of us has our own triggers, right? What I'm saying is not taking control of our triggers when we're aware of them is what's bad, right? We have the power to take control of our triggers back. So this allows you to do that. So pause, take a second, examine the situation. What am I actually upset about? Am I upset about the situation happening right now or something else? Number two is assess the situation. What are my options here? What are my options for responding? Do I have a productive response option here? And sometimes you may not, but 99% of the time you will, right? And then you choose how you want to respond and then respond effectively. All right. What does that look like in the moment? So take away that, take away this. Shit happens. Pause, examine, assess. As you build this muscle, you'll get much faster at this. I'm not saying to go for the 100-pound weight right away. All right. What I'm saying is work on this in the smaller moments where you have the time to do these kind of things. Text messages, emails, anything that's asynchronous, you can take time to actually build that muscle. So in the moment, the more effective you are at doing this, the faster you can do this in the moment, right? And sometimes you're going to respond in not the way you want to. That's okay, right? Ultimately, what's going to happen is your awareness of that's going to come after the fact. What you want to do is work on getting your awareness further back every time. So maybe the first time you realize, oh, you maybe realize the day after, oh, I didn't want to respond that way. I could have responded this way instead. Cool. Well, now you know. So next time you may respond in not the best way again, but 6 hours later instead of the next day, you'll get that awareness. And then an hour later, and then 30 minutes later, and then 5 minutes after, and then immediately after, and then suddenly, before you respond, you can get the awareness. And that's where you take the opportunity to be like, I got this. Now I can respond how I want to respond and not be subject to my feelings. So this is what this looks like, right? Shit happens, you pause, examine, assess, choose what your options are and choose what you want to respond, and then respond accordingly, right? That's taking power back from your anchors and from your triggers. Now, going back to and time check real quick, Coach Lee, want to make sure I'm good on time. Cool, okay. I got like 2 more minutes left to go, maybe 3. So talking about anchors real quick and triggers. What is an anchor? Everyone talks about triggers. People don't talk about anchors. Anchors are the way to create your own triggers in a good way. You can take control of your triggers and use them to your advantage. So if you have a great moment, right? If you're on a roller coaster and let's say you love roller coasters and you're having the time of your life, you're feeling amazing, you can do a physical action to anchor that feeling. So one of my favorites is a simple one because you don't always do it. Take the thumb and your middle finger of your right hand and just tap them together and squeeze. Okay. If you have a good experience, if you have a high state of mind, all right, squeeze those two fingers together, and then just think of that feeling. Really own that feeling, and then you're creating an association with that feeling, right? That's a simple way to do it. Another way is smells. Smell is actually the strongest one. Olfactory is the strongest sense we have. It's the most efficient in terms of getting us back to a memory state that we've had in the past. So if you anchor a feeling with a smell, for me, I mean, some smells are like the incense because that reminds me back of my grandmother and growing up and doing those religious things, or grandfather and doing religious things. That's a scent I associate with those things. But we associate these things. You're basically creating an association. That's all a trigger is. A trigger is an unhealthy association with a certain stimulus with an outcome. So what you want to do is break that stimulus, break that association, and create a new one. You can do that if you don't avoid your things that quote unquote trigger you. So that's how you take power back from those situations. So we can talk more deeply about that in the future. Um, but yeah, putting it all together. So you have control of your emotions. No one else does because they are your emotions. They do belong to you. You don't belong to them unless you give yourself up to them. Um, don't let them have that much control over you. Practice makes perfect. Take the time to practice in the short, smaller moments that don't matter. Make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect. We're human. We were all children at some point in time. Everyone in this room, I can confidently say, was at one point a 6-year-old. And when you're 6, you don't always respond the way you want to respond, right? But you're not aware of it. Your parents may yell at you. That's also not a great response always to get that kind of feedback. But when you think about your 6-year-old self, how would you tell your 6-year-old self to deal with these things? You'd give him a little bit of grace or her a little bit of grace, right? Be like, oh, she's 6 or he's 6. You know, obviously they don't know any better than that right now. So let me help them through this process. All right. Each of us here has that many years between the age of 6 or 7 until now of reinforcement of essentially bad behavior. So give yourself some grace. All right. Utilize your triggers and anchors. Those are the things that I just talked about. They're really easy ways to do that. And that can be any physical or any kind of thing like that, like any association you can create. You can create any association with anything, literally. And then take control back for yourself. So that is my time for today. Thank you so much for the time. Here's my information. And any questions you guys have, please feel free to reach out. The offer I have for everyone. I'm happy to normally I just do a 30-minute introduction with everybody, but with everyone here, I'm happy to do a 1-hour consult with each of you. Anyone here who wants to take advantage of that and talk through any challenges you have, whether it's business, whether it's personal, whether it's leadership, any of those things. Go ahead and drop me an email and I will send you the link for that. And then I also have a small 20-page book that I wrote about resilience, which is going to be part of a larger book that I'm writing on resilience. But it's a really cool, I think it's really cool. I'm kind of biased, but it's a really cool read and it kind of gets some more of these concepts, a little depth into these things. So questions?